Good afternoon, everyone. Carahsoft Technology would like to welcome you to our Otava webinar. At this time, I would like to introduce our speakers for today, Jeremy Pomeranian, Jason Pullman, and Michael Deemer. The floor is now yours, guys. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Olivia. I'm going to share my screen now. We'll get started. Do a quick check here. Mike and Jeremy, can you see my screen?
Okay.
Yes, sir.
All right, we'll get started. All right, welcome. And thank you for taking time out of your day to join us. We're going to touch on a lot with ransomware, how to protect yourself, talk about attack surfaces, penetration techniques, and overall general concepts to help you fortify your network. I'm going to start by introducing our panel today because we've got a tremendous panel here. First off is Mike Deemer. Go ahead and introduce yourself to everybody out there.
All right, thank you. Good morning and good afternoon, everybody. My name is Michael Deemer, systems engineer here from Veeam Software. I bring nearly a decade worth of IT experience, really supporting the Veeam service provider side. Highly proficient in hardware and software technologies with a focus in cloud engineering, and an expert in all things Veeam. Thanks for having me here today, guys.
Yeah, thank you, Mike. Jeremy is who I go to for any security questions. So Jeremy has a title of acronyms behind his name, but we shorten it down to one, CISSP here for our purposes today. So Jeremy, introduce yourself to everybody.
Sure. Thank you. My name is Jeremy Pomeranian. I am the security lead at Otava, as Jason mentioned, and I have a plethora of certifications, if that matters, but about 22 plus years of IT experience overall, and about probably the last 15, 16 years focused on IT security. And so I enjoy that side of the house and have been for a long time. And so I hope I can provide some value to you.
I'm sure you will. We're going to call on you quite a bit today. My name is Jason Pullman. I'll be your moderator today. I am the Director of Solutions Architecture and Delivery here at Otava. I've been with the company a little bit more than 5 years. Come from companies like Dell EMC, HP, had many years in the operations side, so I've dealt with this firsthand. So I hope to bring some perspective and lead the conversation here today. At the very end, it'll be some Q&A time for everybody to ask questions, and I hope you do participate. Just a shout out to Carahsoft, Olivia, and team for helping us put this together. So thank you very much. And with that, we'll get started. If you stay with us, I'll guarantee you'll learn something today. I usually say at least one thing, but I bet you pick up more than just one thing. So please stay with us today and jot down any notes. And like I said, we'll be available for questions immediately following. Everybody knows that ransomware is in the news, right? I didn't want to put a bunch up here because everybody hears about this. They know it's daily news. Every day something's happening in the world of security and ransomware out there. I just read yesterday, and we'll be talking about multi-factor authentication. Google, 150 million accounts, they enforced two-factor on for people who are not running two-factor. So it's an everyday part of our lives now. So you'll hear about some certain things that we do recommend that hopefully you are already participating in protecting yourself and your network. Howard University, you can see here they canceled online classes. If I recall correctly, they asked for quite a bit of money, and they came back and eventually settled. But what happened is that it was a phishing scam, and phishing is so easy to get caught up in today because you can take maybe a trusted advisor, change a letter or two, and the domain looks valid from somebody you might expect to receive an email from, or click on a link. So phishing techniques get each and everybody every day. An interesting stat I read when I was researching that event is about 176,000 ransomware attempts happen every week. It almost is worrisome right now as we're on here. You're thinking about this, what I need to do to protect myself. So we're going to get into that. Broward, the largest school, I think it's the 6th largest school district in the US, was hit, and they were able to pull financial documents out of that system and posted them online, like 26,000 documents. That one I do recall, they asked for 10 million, and they dropped it down to 4, and I forget what they eventually settled on, but the CTO of Broward Schools went back and asked the board for 20 million for security and warned them that next time it won't be as easy to get out of this. So there are, it can be hit by through email, through open servers, weak passwords. The city of Yonkers, they had 6 servers that took them down for six days, I believe it was. And they decided not to pay the ransomware. And what they did is they restored from backup, elected to do that, but they were down a week. And we're going to talk about that. And that's why we have our experts from Veeam along here with us to talk about how easy it is, how we can make it or facilitate that, along with other things to protect yourself from ransomware. Mike, do you have anything, or Jeremy, anything else on that?
I'll just say, since 2018 in the educational space, there's been about 222 ransomware attacks affecting 3,800 schools and universities. So if you think it won't happen to you, listen to that number again, 3,880 schools to be exact. And 39 of those attacks were this year. And that doesn't even include some of the supply chain attacks that we're seeing. Those numbers were not counted in there. So it can happen to anyone.
Right. Mike, any thoughts?
Yeah, I think you guys have both really great information. I think the biggest one I think to take away is, regardless of size, location, or where we're at, this ransomware threat isn't going to go away anytime soon. It's only ramping up, and this is something that we really just need to kind of be more proactive and reactive on.
Absolutely, it's preparedness, and that's what we hope to impart on you today, is give you some ideas to how to be prepared. It's my great segue too. It's not a question of if, it's really when. Like I said, how many are happening every week? It's quite fascinating. Since we really know this, and these stats really are just telling us that not hitting the last year, but expect to be hit in the future. I think we all do. If we all don't expect to be hit, we can't be prepared properly, and that's what we're here to help you with today. 44% of educational organizations were hit by ransomware last year. There's certain groups out there that are targeting certain markets. There's some that target utilities, schools. There's certain ones that target government institutions. I read one today that they're targeting aerospace. So there's certain groups out there that are targeting. There are groups out there that are targeting school districts. The average cost of a data breach in the education sector is $3.79 million. What's interesting is that that's not all ransom. A lot of that is attorney fees, getting systems back online, brand damage, getting awareness out there, and rebuilding the company. So that's the 3.79 encompasses a lot of different things, not just the amount of ransom that's been paid. Mike, any thoughts or any additional ideas or thoughts on these stats?
Yeah, of course. So that 3.79 million, to be brutally honest, I've been here in this IT space for a while, and that number has grown. It's not going to be slowing down, unfortunately. Unfortunately, it's going actually the opposite way. And that really comes down to a lot of people just not being ready for this type of ransomware attack and not having that readiness plan in place. Because it is one of these inevitable things that we really need to be really, first and foremost, just really looking for and being really proactive about. Because again, this is one thing that, regardless of size, regardless of where we are, it's going to be able to affect you. And one of the biggest things I like to say is there's a huge difference between being proactive and reactive, right? You have a lot better of a chance if you're proactive. You already have all your stuff in place. You have DR plans. And really the biggest thing is, when things arise and you get hit with some type of exploit, ransomware, it's going to be like you just lost everything, right? Because that's exactly what it's going to feel like. And one of the biggest things I like to say is having some type of DR plan or a readiness plan in place is absolutely going to be mission critical, because I've been there when I was an MSP admin, and guess what? We got hit with ransomware, and it was literally like every engineer just got their head cut off, and we had a million things to do. And having some type of DR plan, knowing what servers we need to bring back online, who's doing what, and what is the progression of these servers in place to make sure that we get them back up and restored to these end users, and how we do that is one of those big things that I really say is very important and very critical to test.
Right, absolutely. And we're going to talk about the preparedness here in just a little bit more detail. Jeremy, any thoughts on this slide before we go to the next one?
You mentioned earlier just a little bit about extortion, where sometimes they're asking you for money, or they're going to put your pictures or your documents out on the web. Preparedness really segues right into that, because if you're not prepared, what do? You could be like the city that says, no, we're not going to pay the ransom, but then what if they put your pictures out there, your files that are important, or your top secret information? So preparedness is very, very important. Good point there, guys.
Yeah, very good. Yeah, and this comes from Sophos, so it's not just Otava or Jason pulling these stats just from general places. This comes from a report done by Sophos, State of Ransomware in Education. So that's where we pull these numbers from. All right, Jeremy, would you speak to the top ransomware sources? So we hear about it, but what are the vehicles or methods that are penetrating our networks, and how are they trying, and what type of methodology are they trying to use to penetrate?
Sure. Well, a lot of it, I'll say it again, what's old is new. It's the same, in a lot of ways, it's the same attack vectors: Trojan, social engineering, removable media that we see there, malvertising, social media, clicking on links, phishing attacks, the same old stuff that we've seen for a long time. But then I'll go into some more stuff. This ransomware as a service and supply chain attacks is kind of a new vector. And if you're doing all your stuff right, you can train your users, and security awareness is huge. You can train them not to click on links, and not to go out to these social media sites, or maybe click on these shortened links, things like that, not to plug in USB sticks and click on things and out of curiosity. But let's say you're doing all that right and you're relaxed, you're living the dream in IT. You're just enjoying yourself, having a good day. You've got your tropical island screensaver. You're dreaming about being on the beach, and then what do you know? Everything's happening. Your security awareness is good. Your patching is good. Your programs are in place. Everything's running on all cylinders, and boom, your supply chain gets attacked. All of a sudden, your patching vendor gets attacked. It has nothing to do with what you've done to prepare. You're doing what's right. You're implementing patching and all that stuff. So these new supply chain attacks are a big thing, and you can get malicious code pushed through that in the form of an update. And so there's, even if you do all these things and you train, you can still get hit. And that's where I think we transition over to Michael, because the value of 32110 comes really in handy when you do get hit. And a good backup alone is only as good as your restore. You can have all the backups in the world, but if you can't restore it, it doesn't matter. But Michael could probably speak more to that, but it's very important that you've got this backup strategy that we're going to kind of hit in the next few slides here.
Yeah, we are going to hit that, and we're going to have Michael speak to that here in just a second. We're going to talk about preparedness on the next slide. Mike, any thoughts on the infection sources?
Yeah, I mean, Jeremy said a lot of good information, right? These are all these common infection approaches that have been along for a long time. But I feel like, especially in any type of space, a lot of this is about to ramp up. It's the end of the year, especially malvertising. I just got like an SMS text just like 15, 20 minutes ago. It was like, hey, press this JavaScript, and a lot of people, and I think that comes to being aware and just being suspicious of things. And that's one of the things I really try to teach people is, don't just trust everything that just comes along, right? This is something that their job is to try to social engineer you guys and make sure that they can get the data that they want, right? So, and again, I think Jeremy brought up a very, very valid point with supply chain attacks, right? You might be doing every single thing right. Every single thing, you have every protocol locked down, every patch is done, and everything, like you said, it's all filing on all cylinders. And then, you have a supply chain attack where it's just something that's out of your scope that you just didn't know that potentially could have happened. And that also kind of goes back to brand reputation, right? So something that, that is really tarnishing those particular brand reputations and really making it hard for particular companies to bounce back after that.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a great point. You can think of, of course, the supply chain issues we're having right now, and getting a product into the stores instead of on ships out in the oceans sitting right now. When that hot Christmas item comes down and there's nothing on the shelves, and think about all those folks out there going to do malvertising about the hottest product. Click here for one, click here for one. And it is just going to be a frenzy later on this year. I hate to say it, but it's going to be. So good point there. All right, so let's get into some of the meat of the discussion here. And we're not using any of this as scare tactics, mind. It is just why you need to be prepared, because we're all busy in our daily lives and we're doing this and doing that. And sometimes, you know, it's not right in front of us. Well, it needs to be, right? Because it's coming and it will happen. Like I said, it's not a question of if, but when. So, and some of these things on how to prepare, I'm sure you're already doing. And if there was just one silver bullet, you know, that person would be rich, right? If there was one silver bullet to prevent ransomware. It's the attack surface is varies, and it varies by business. But as long as you're incorporating some of these pertinent tenets to your preparedness plan, you're going to be in much better shape, not only preventing, but what to do when you get hit. That's equally as important. So that's why you need to get a plan together. But let's cover some of these right here. Keep all software and antivirus and anti-malware solutions up to date. That's a given, and most people have that already, and most people have it automatically updating. Double check that though. Check your virus tests. Make sure that they're being downloaded on a regular basis. Make sure all that is working. Especially with the erosion of the edge and the edge going out to remote workers nowadays, it's good to have something that can do a posture check from your end users too, to make sure that they have the correct virus defs, the program is running, and you're doing everything to protect yourself. So keep that in mind, that just by having it on there is great, but double check and make sure it's active and working. Perform a threat analysis with your security team. Can't say this enough. It doesn't cost that much to do vol scans and get that information to understand what your attack surface looks like, and then pay somebody, a third party, to do some penetration testing. It doesn't cost that much, and the results are going to be invaluable, and it's going to show you did your due diligence in trying to understand your attack platform, your vector, and how you're going to remediate any of the security issues. It's a great start to getting your preparedness plan together. Train your staff on cybersecurity practices. You all try to do that. I know we all receive those emails, and I probably would say in the average person's inbox right now, it's just added to all the noise. So even more than ever now, we have to be very critical on our information paths we take, because email nowadays doesn't do it. So look to work with we're going to talk about an incident response team here in just a minute, but work with your team. It's not a team of one. It needs to be a team of several folks, and we'll talk about that. But make sure you guys are talking about how to inform the end user, because just by sending an email to an inbox anymore to inform them or warn them or advise them is just not enough. Strong passwords. I think it was not Broward, not Howard, but Broward County. I think it was a password that somebody got. At least that's what was reported. Strong passwords. Change your passwords. There's password program managers out there that work very, very well. I've been using one for, I don't know, 10 years or so now, the same one, and I swear by it, because you need a password for everything. I ordered lunch today from Panera, and I had that saved in there, and it's a strong password, because I know Panera doesn't have the security budget as most people do, so I want to make sure it's secure as possible. So password manager programs are invaluable if you can get those on your computer. I like using one outside of the browser. I know some people like using the browser. That's just me. They all work the same. Monitoring tools for increased visibility. And that visibility, you need to make sure that all the stakeholders, especially that might be on your response team, have that visibility, can understand what to do when it happens. The pipeline oil spill, when they were talking about the timing of this, when they were notified, when they saw the low pressure, when it was first reported, it was a Friday night at 6 o'clock. That bad timing for everybody. School districts, a lot of us go home at 5 o'clock, right? Sometimes those things are harder to check right away. So the more visibility you can bring into potential malicious activity, the better, early and often. Backup media types, and and Mike, I'm going to transition to you here in just a second, but I do want to talk about that next bullet before we talk about backups. Establish your incident response team and meet regularly. That is a requirement for a lot of compliances that are out there today, and this team shouldn't be just one person, shouldn't just be your admin. It should be a host of people, including, think about, if you do get hit and damage to brand recognition, your PR department should be on that too. They should know what they're supposed to do. Your marketing team, of course, maybe security, your IT team. You should have all these different folks on this incident response team and have a plan of action. And not only do that, but activate it once a quarter, or maybe twice a year, if once a quarter is too much, but activate it to follow those policies and procedures to make sure everybody knows their role. Because not only is it important to protect yourself from ransomware, it's also equally important on how you deal with a ransomware attack and to make sure that you mitigate everything and remediate everything as soon as possible. One way to do that, and this is what the city of Yonkers did, is when they got hit, they said, nope, we're not going to pay. We'll just take the hit. We'll be down, but we're going to restore from backups. So Mike, talk about how backups are a pertinent strategy.
Yeah, of course. So I'm going to talk a little bit about 32110, but maybe you guys may have been heard of it. Maybe you guys haven't. I would assume, or at least hope, that most of you have heard around 321. If you haven't, and you currently have a backup vendor that say, hey, we don't do 321, I would highly advise to pick up your stuff and run as far as humanly possible away. 321 is one of these things that is not just a Veeam standard. It's across the board in all really IT backup in general. And what that really boils down to is just 3 different copies of your data, 2 of those on 2 different forms of media and 1 off-site. Now, with that 32110, and I'll talk a little bit about it more in depth here, is having 1 off-site and 1 offline. So, and let's just kind of talk about that, right? So this 32110 rule is very, very important to making sure that your DR plan is something that you can actually activate, right? If you don't have your data backed up in a proper form and format, it's going to be very hard to restore. And also the biggest thing that I like to say is always testing. Because if you don't test your backups, and for whatever reason, 3, 6 months, 9 years, whatever that particular delta is, and you need to restore and you never tested it, you never, put it to any type of lengthy test, and you go back to restore and it's like, hey, broken VMDK file or corrupt disk, the array's bad, whatever that may be, you really just shot yourself in the foot. You might have been keeping this backup for 3 years and really relied on it. And now let's talk about this in a more holistic view. And so let's kind of really break this down. So the very first thing we need to do is have 3 different copies of our data. And in the Veeam world, that's 3 different VMDK, so active fulls of this particular data. So that's the 3. Now we have 2 different forms of media. In most cases, that's going to really fall into like the SSD in the tape world. So 2 different forms of media, so 2 different completely disklets kind of in a way, and then 1 offsite. So making sure that we can push it off to a data center like Otava, right? And we can have that offsite in an immutable. And that's another big one that I want to point out there. It is an immutable target that's geo-redundant, because having some type of redundancy in these arrays is very mission critical. Just in case one service availability goes down, you can still pull from the other one. And once we pair all that with the 32110 rule, and that 0 rule is active Veeam backup and replication, sure backup goes out and test it. So this is the testing portion. So making sure that the backup's good, that we can actually restore from it. And we've actually done our due diligence to make sure that it's completely encapsulating the data and there's nothing wrong with it. And we know for a fact, whatever that time frame is going down the road, we're going to be able to restore. And that's the way we can make sure that you guys are completely secured across the board, because we have 1 offsite, 1 offline, and they have all been tested across the board.
Mike, it's true. I couldn't agree more. It has to be tested. Just like I mentioned, activating your incident response team, you need to test this. You need to run some tabletops. You need to make sure everything is prepared and ready to go. And I'll speak to just a minute about the city of Yonkers, because they had several things in place, but there's a few things they did not have in place. Mike, we talk about, we're hearing some terms, and to the audience out there, I'll try to stop and adjust an acronym, because we may hear some acronyms from Jeremy and Mike we may not always understand. But immutable. Immutable mean, what's the best way? I think of it as a worm copy, write once, read many. But what's a better way to explain what immutable actually does for us?
Yeah, so immutable is one of these new forms of repositories, right? So at least for me, it's this, either we can do, for at least on the Veeam side, we can have a hardened Linux immutable repository. So basically what is an immutable repository? First off, it's exactly what Jason said. It's work, write once, read many. So once that data goes into the repository, it has an immutable flag set on it. That immutable flag makes sure that it can never be overwritten during that particular time. So if you have a 30-day immutable flag, it doesn't matter who you are or what type of access you have, it's just not going to be able to be overwritten. Now, can you restore from it? Yeah, absolutely. That's the whole point of it. But it's having some immutable offsite or potentially on-prem immutable target that's completely malware proof, ransomware proof, and exploit proof, because nobody can get in there and actually manipulate that data. So a lot of good stuff that really comes with the immutable side of the house.
You hit it right there, because what was happening is that, you know, the people were assuming control by use of an administrator account. They were getting the credentials somehow, some way, either by phishing scams or what have you. And they were getting access to the backup console. Once they're in there, they can lock those repositories. And that's what was happening. And so the whole term of immutability came out, and to protect us against that. So no matter if it's a backup admin, a domain admin, or who the admin might be, they're not going to be able to match or destruct those copies or lock them down, because they are what we're now calling immutable. Mike, another question here. When you, a lot of people hear the term air gap. How does air gapping fall into this program?
Yeah, so air gap is one of these other solutions that we have that's, you know, completely offsite, right? So it's in an encapsulated data of maybe tape or maybe even a SSD offsite. So when I think of air gap, it's offline. So no matter what, as soon as it's out of the on-prem production site, the data itself can never be changed, right? So it's air gap. So no matter what happens, nobody can go out there and touch it. And most of the time, when I think of air gap, I think of like an Iron Mountain type of feel. Hey, I send off my tapes, it goes to Iron Mountain. No matter what happens, the only times that data can be read is once it gets sent back to me over FedEx or UPS, then I plug it into my complete server and actually can do that restore. And it's completely gone. Like as soon as it's off your site, there's nobody that's going to be able to get that data in between.
Yeah, very good. Did you notice a little trick we did here with the icon? There's a little air gap between the clouds.
I like it. I like it.
Yeah, so we're able to do that as well at Otava. Have a copy at one of our secure locations, and then replicate that on our back end network to another location and have some air gapping between those backups. So great information there. And this is, like I mentioned, this is where the city of Yonkers said, you know what, we can recover because we test our recovery. That's what they did. They said, we're not paying, we're going to restore from backup, because they had this tested and they follow a similar policy. What they didn't have in place was an incident response team to get everybody together. And that's where they cited defaults at. They didn't have that in place. And therefore it took 6 or 7 days to get back online. So Jeremy, I'm like to transition to you on this next slide here. MFA, I mentioned about Google enforcing that. Could you walk us through and go into some of these in depth of why we want to do this from a security perspective?
Sure, and I'm going to kind of take an example of one of the very first ransomware events that I ever saw and had to work on. Had we had multi-factor authentication in place, it would have been a non-event. The virus never would have been able to authenticate and start spreading. So we could have thwarted it at step one. But in a lot of these steps that you see here, had we done any of these, and I think Jason, you alluded to it earlier, the multiple, there's not really one magic bullet to stop ransomware, but it's in depth. I know the term defense in depth, we haven't heard that in years because we always have to come up with new things, but it really is defense in depth. It's a lot of these different defenses that we have, defense mechanisms that we can put in place, and together they can help thwart these attacks. You know, the ransomware event that I was involved with early on years ago, kind of when it was first coming out, is it was spread through network shares. And you know, as it as it spread, we found out, one, that our endpoints, they had antivirus, but they didn't have signatures for this new malware. So that was one thing. It got through that. So that's possible that you have antivirus, but something makes its way through. It's not, antivirus is great to have. We all need to have it. We all need to keep it up to date. We need to have anti-malware on our machines, but it doesn't mean that's our only defense, because that defense could be broken. But as it went through there, it started spreading through shares, and we quickly found out that this company that we had acquired, we had not fully acquired them yet, but they were connected to us now. We found out quickly that they had no policies in place for who had access. We had wide open shares, and everyone was allowed to read and write. And so this little low-level user account that was compromised was able to be used to authenticate to these shares. And that's, if you have open shares allowed, with everyone available to read, write, that's a terrible idea. Don't do that. The shares should be locked down to only those who need access, and not everyone needs access. And so we found out some issues there. Had we had some enforcement there, we could have stopped that. And then the other thing is role-based access. I'm sorry, can't talk today. Role-based access. Speaking of those shares, who needs access to that? What's their role? How do we control that? That's easy to do today with things like Microsoft Active Directory or Azure Active Directory, all that stuff. It's easy to implement. There's no reason why we can't do that. Even if it's Linux shares, it's easy to do. So no need not to do that, but that would have stopped this thing from spreading too. If the user didn't have access to this share, it couldn't have propagated out, and couldn't have gone on. So we could have thwarted it there. And the other thing that we found out is that we didn't have any file integrity or monitoring looking for anomalies and important changes to those important files. So, when a file is changed, it's a very important file. We probably need to know about that. Was this something that we meant to do? Is this something a user is making a change, or is it malware that's making a change to this file? We had no way of knowing that, and we could have had we had something like file integrity monitoring in place. And then our logging was so bad, we didn't have any logging. We had to turn logging on during the event to try and find out the who, what, where, when, why, how. You never want to be in that position. So as Michael and Jason have alluded to earlier, be prepared. Be prepared. You need to be prepared ahead of time so that we don't end up in the situation where we could have thwarted it at every one of these steps, or almost every one of these steps, but we weren't prepared with any of these. And so it spread like wildfire through the environment. And when it does, and if it does, we got to know how we can recover. And I think you guys are going to cover a little bit more about the recovery objectives and time objectives. But if it does happen, we do need to be able to recover. And you guys can kind of speak on that or add some commentary here.
Yeah, we certainly will. And thank you for all that. I appreciate that. And when you say we, you're not talking about you and I. You're talking about
no.
days ago, right? Okay.
Years ago. Sorry.
Thank you. So zero trust, it means different things to different people. It really is every data packet that traverses your network, you should not trust. And what I really like about this slide is something I mentioned earlier, is that with social engineering has aggressive. Mike mentioned about supply chains earlier, and I talked about the product or the toy of the year coming up. That remains to be seen. I don't know what it is, but we're going to run out of it. And so, what type of social engineering is going to happen? Who knows what could happen? But the idea is zero trust. I'm not going to trust anything from anybody without maybe doing a couple security steps first. Do I recognize the name? Is that a valid domain? Instead of gmail.com, is it gmaile.com? Take a little bit of effort, not saying, run and hide or anything like that, but just take a little bit of effort and just to make sure that you're protecting yourself from social engineering. Secure endpoint devices, we talked about that a little earlier too, with doing posture checking. Anybody that touches your network, you should know about that machine, at least what that machine is running, making sure, like I said, antivirus is running, et cetera. And your enforced policies and controls, it's not just policies as in directory services, as Jeremy was talking about, also controls about the building, who can access what room, who has keys to what. You need to make sure that those controls are in place to ensure that equipment remains safe. I'm going to talk about recovery, Mike, but is there anything you wanted to add on this slide?
Yeah, you guys had really great information. I guess the little 2 bits of information I'll add into here is really about the secure, like as access, right? I would assume most people have some type of admin on-prem, and most of the time I would say they're using admin credentials throughout the entire day. So one of the biggest things that I always try to advise and kind of just talk about is, absolutely do your engineers and your admins need full-blown admin privileges to do certain tasks of their job, without a doubt. But I would say probably about 70% of their tasks probably don't need the admin, admin password and credentials, and that all those different security accounts and security roles and permissions that kind of come along with them. So what I used to do is, when your admin is not adminning and isn't doing any type of administration, have them log in like a regular end user. The biggest thing for that is making sure that, again, you're being very secure. And it's one of these easy tasks that I feel like anybody can do. And that also kind of leads me into an examining, right? I think Jeremy really hit it on the head about, really making sure that we look at that. And that's where I would say Veeam 1 comes into play, where we can have some type of ransomware alarm that really looks at, maybe data transitions, right? So maybe your backup has been only pushing a couple megs or a couple gigs for the last, I don't know, maybe 100, 150 days, because it's just doing incremental backups. And then all of a sudden you're getting active fulls and it's going to different folders, and you're seeing all this malicious and really suspicious type of activity that's going on in the environment. And I think that's one of those big things to go, hey, light bulb moment, we need to go look at this and examine to make sure this is actually what's going on, if there's any type of malicious software going in, or is this actually just an active full. A lot of these things can be easily implemented and really help long-term goals.
Yeah, and that's the thing we want to impart today, is that there's some things you get started on right now. You don't need that $1 million plus budget to implement it. There's things you can do right now, and we're giving some ideas today on how to achieve that. The next slide is really how to recover. Now, I'm not going to spend a lot of time here. We have gone through a lot of this, is testing your restores. Not only test your restores, do a tabletop where you have one of your servers down. Make it a mission critical server so you guys can understand what the RTO is. Now, Jeremy mentioned that. We're going to cover that here in a minute. RTO is recovery time objective. How long can you tolerate that particular device or that server being down? And that's why I say start with your mission criticals to understand that. Test your offsite copies, like test those air gap copies, bring those back. How long does it take to get a copy back? So if something does happen to that server where they put a lock on it, you have to get new hardware, or you have some surplus hardware that you need to do a bare metal restore on, test that as part of your tabletop. Not the first one, because that's a little bit more challenging, but maybe your second or third one, throw that in there to do a bare metal from an offsite copy. Your incident response and recovery plan. So not only is it important to have your incident response teams with all the people that we mentioned earlier, but to have that plan, have that documented plan in a location that if a server is hit with ransomware and locked, that's not where your incident recovery plan is. So make sure everybody has a copy of that and has a local copy so they know exactly what their role is and what they're supposed to do. It doesn't hurt to have a 24/7 NOC infrastructure monitoring. And I know a lot of you guys are saying, we don't have that. So why even mention that? Well, that's where Otava can come in and help, because we do. And then also, if you do establish an incident response team and you have cloud services or desktop services from Otava, we can be a part of that incident response team because we are a stakeholder in that plan as well. I know we had a question last time. I'm just going to throw it out there. But their NIST is a good organization to get a incident response plan together. So if you Google NIST, N-I-S-T, and incident response plan, you'll see that come up. Though it's a great plan to get you started, a great template to get you started. And we can certainly provide some advisement and a consultation in getting that plan together. Best practices. This is, I want to include this because with the distributed workforce that we have now, people working from home, the pandemic pushing people out to work from their homes. A lot of us are working from homes. I'm one of them right now. So what can we do to protect ourselves remotely? And I'm going to go through a couple of these, but Mike and Jeremy, I'm going to want your comments on this to get your input. But Virtual access, a VPN. There's so many different VPN services out there. I subscribe to one. I have my whole family on it. So anything that we connect to, especially dealing with financial, we go through a VPN and multi-factor. So virtual access also can be controlled. You know, we talked about posture checking. And sometimes that's difficult to manage that. And maybe you have the budget for that. But if you're in a desktop as a service or remote desktop services as Otava offers, that can be done by Otava and or by your provider who's providing those desktops for you. So there's a lot of control that can happen from having a desktop or remote desktop in the cloud. Physical security, I like that. We've kind of talked about that in controls to make sure that, you know, teach employees secure their home Wi-Fi routers. It's tough to do that, right? Because, you know, these people don't know how to get into that router, probably never have. And that's where it goes back to having something to do posture checks or informing them to make sure that they're running virus and the virus defs are up to date. Practicing good, what do you call that, citizenship on the internet to protect themselves, to make sure they're being aware, going back to the zero trust policy. Changing the default passwords. A lot of people don't change those defaults on those routers, especially the ones they buy from the store. I know the ones from most commercial agencies, like a Comcast or Cox or whoever, they come with their own password. But you know, if you have your router in an open place out there, and you have maybe some contractors coming in doing some work, that's an easy lift. Just walk over there, grab that password when you're not looking, and now they can have access to your router. So be cautious of that. Change your passwords. Basic security training, installing security software. I don't really want to go through all of these. I do want to keep this moving. But Mike, thoughts on remote work best practices?
Yeah, and I think you really hit it on the head. I think one of the biggest ones that I see, and a lot of the weakness in infrastructure, is exactly what we kind of mentioned a little earlier in the webinar, was the edge is gone. We don't have this physical presence of, hey, we're going into an office. It's all set up because the IT admin has really done his due diligence, making sure that AD is good and firewalls are good. And we have this now, this just, you know, home router that has to be our one all and be all. And I would say, and this kind of because I'm a nerd, when you log into, you know, your local area network, so you're just sitting at home and you're just scrolling on your phone, most people never change their passwords. And I can tell you with a quick script, you can probably get into most of your neighbors' passwords with very little to no effort at all, because it's all just very basic. They probably have never changed it from admin password, which is Googleable if you have whatever ISP out there. So it's just, again, and I think Jason really talked about it, is you don't have to have $1 million budget. You don't have to have this really extravagant type of infrastructure. It's really the little things that add up to making sure that we can at least have a little more readiness and just be more prepared for those things that really come in over the traffic, because that's one of the biggest things that we have to worry about working from home, right? There's no physical barrier.
Yeah, well put. Jeremy, what's your thoughts here?
Yeah, I think you hit most of it on the head there. Not a whole lot to add, but I'll piggyback a little bit on what Michael said with the wireless attacks. Like, you know, I can spend $15 on Amazon to get a wireless card and run free software and grab your wireless hash anyway, and then crack it offline, you know. And so attackers don't have to be sophisticated, don't have to spend a lot of money. They can do this very cheaply, and you know, the price of attacking you has come way down. You know, $15 on a wireless card, almost anybody can do that. So that's why all of the basic things, changing the passwords, you know, not using the defaults, those are easy wins, and you know, they'll save you in the long run.
Yeah, exactly. Now, mentioned here, we talked about really all of this stuff, all these bullets, and it's just not one silver bullet. You've heard that several times from several of us here on the webinar here. If it was, like I said, somebody would be rich, but there's a multitude of things you can do to protect yourself, not only in a proactive but reactive manner. I think we've given you guys some ideas of how to go about that, how to chip away at some of that yourselves without that big budget. And then the last bullet here, I'm going to give a shameless plug to Otava as we go through the next couple of slides, but is we can provide those desktop resources. And we're going to show you a slide here in just a little bit of who to contact, and they can pull myself, Jeremy, or Mike into a call, and we can have a conversation about how we can help get you started down that path. Otava, where we not only talk about it, but we live it. We are a secure, compliant cloud. You can see all of our compliances on the left-hand side. We've done this for years. It's not just us telling you that, hey, this is all just kind of new to all of us. We've been doing this for years. In fact, when we show you this, it's not just us going through the controls and the certification process. We're actually audited by a third party, which we have all that available to share with all of our customers. So if they should have to ever go through an inspection or an audit, which audits, if you guys have been through audits, they're not pleasant. All that documentation we provide our customers can be very handy because we are known to be a trusted, compliant cloud. So all these services we do offer, we talked about backup today and how it's good to have a 32110 backup. Ataba can help with premise-based backups or anything within our clouds. Create that security strategy within those backups of having the air-gapped, the immutable copies to protect yourself. So we always have a copy to recover from. And that's going to be part of our incident response plan, right? Is to test those on a regular basis. Remote desktop is the other one. So we don't have control of those edges. You might have with this bringing your own devices. That's scary for the admins out there and the engineers out there. I know it's scary. We can help take some of that burden off your shoulders so you can focus on other areas of the business or providing the services with remote desktop. And I'm going to get into next kind of a strategy. I'm going to mute real quick. Somebody's at the door here. My apologies. What you're seeing here is how Otava takes, I mentioned earlier, understand your mission criticals, your business criticals, utility servers. What we're showing you here is that we have multiple ways to attack this. And it's not just, again, one program or one service that can do this. It's actually building a plan together. And that's what you're showing you here, that you might have your mission critical servers to keep that uptime. We might do it with a near zero RPO. RPO is recover point objective. We might do it with a 24-hour with just the native backups that we have. So what we like to do is go through and do a consultative effort. It's just a conversation really of understanding the applications that's running your infrastructure, as well as what is critical. Can you not go without, or what can the business not go without having up and running? And so we take a consultative approach to this, listing everything out in a list and applying an RPO strategy. RTO is recovery time objective and recover point objective. And that should be part of your incident response plan as well, to have all that out, because you guys know, because everybody's going to be in a panic that day that something's down, and you got a plan to go through. This is what we agreed on. This is we're going to focus on getting back up first. This after that, and this is utility that we can have down for 3 to 6 days. So we go through a plan like that, and this product suite helps us overlay a strategy, a solution to that. I'm going to skip over this so we can have some more time for Q&A, but really what this is telling you, this is like a RACI diagram that tells responsibilities. A lot of what we do is service-based, and we're a team of 24/7, 365. There's over 120 employees at Otava. We have people around the clock watching our networks. But this is a service from Otava. So you can rest assured and go home at 5 o'clock at night and know that Otava has your back in watching what's going on. Get started today. We can, I'll show you in the next slide here. I'll show you some individuals that you can get in contact with. But what's interesting here is that we can get you started with a conversation today. Hopefully you learned a couple things from us today about how to be proactive and reactive. And if you want to have a deeper conversation about any of this or see what we have to offer, we can certainly set that up for you. And here's 3 guys that we can start that conversation with. These guys are some of the nicest guys you could ever meet. You invite them over for Christmas. They're great guys just to have a conversation with. And like I said, Garrett, Tony, and John can pull us in, myself, Jeremy, or Mike, and have a deeper conversation. So please take advantage of that, and we'll be happy to help. We do it all the time. We have many different customers. We have these conversations every day, and we'd be happy to help you. So Olivia, we'll open this up now for Q&A. Do you have any questions out there? And the audience, please think of something here and shoot it our way, and we'll see. If we can't answer it for you, we'll get the answer.
It looks like we have one question we can ask here, which is, who all should participate in our incident response team?
I'll take this, and then Mike and Jeremy have you comment. I mentioned if you have a cloud provider, have them as part of their stakeholder. Have your PR person or somebody from marketing. Of course, your IT team has somebody for executive management that can be the facilitator for that to get that information out. So if you're have all these different districts, have that one point of contact that will be your communication agent. Have them a part of your response team, and just make sure everybody knows what their roles are. Jeremy, who else would you recommend to be on that team?
I think, the obvious, like you said, is the IT department, the executives, all the people that have a stake in that. But you mentioned brand reputation earlier with ransomware. And I think it's very important that if you've got a media contact or somebody who's going to have to speak to the media, you need to have someone like that on your team as well. And that's something that a lot of people don't think about probably. But I think people that can help you protect your brand, and even legal, to make sure you're going through the right steps. So.
Right, exactly. Legal is a big one. Good point. Mike?
Yeah,
Sure.
I think you guys both hit it really right on the head, right? Is making sure that everybody that absolutely has a task to do is included onto this particular team, right? And don't make it very limited. I always like to say, especially on like a disaster recovery team or some type of response team, the more eyes, the more mouths, and the more hands that you can have is absolutely critical. Of course, you don't need like the janitor on there, but making sure that, everybody that can actually participate and help with the actual remediation of exactly what's going on, legal, PR, these guys are going to be able to help mitigate these particular spreads or, a brand reputation, that slander that may come out very quickly, right? Because people are quick to write articles anymore, and it's hard to get those things off the internet and actually sway the vote the other way. So making sure that we're absolutely on top of the ball and right outside the gate is going to be, I think either a success or failure right from the start.
Absolutely. And I mentioned earlier that having that team together, you can go out to NIST, NIST, and look for, and just Google search NIST and Incident Response Plan, a great template that they have out there to help and give you some insight on who should be a part of that as well. Olivia, what else do we have?
Do see a comment in the chat if you wanted to look at that, but there is another question here we have asking if you could pinpoint a specific security measure to protect us from ransomware, what would it be?
That's a good question. And like we said, there's not just one thing. If I was to start with a plan, because we don't always have those big budgets to do things with, it would be education, because I can take that upon myself as an admin to educate and bring zero trust awareness to my user base. And you got to be careful where it doesn't turn into noise, but effectively. And I find that it's not emails, but that's some visuals to help get your message across. I think that is one piece of the plan, but I think that is very important. In fact, the phishing that we talked about earlier is what happened to Howard. They were able to get in. So if you can enforce and reinforce zero trust education, I would say that is probably the first thing I would start to attack if I didn't have the budget and everything else in place. As well as what Yonkers did, and that's they had some sense of control of the matter because they knew they had backups. They knew that their backups worked. They knew their recovery processes worked. So those two things, if I would say, probably is where I would start. But Jeremy, why don't you? What's your opinion here?
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think security awareness is such a huge thing. And security awareness, it doesn't have to cost any money to educate users. It costs maybe a little bit of time to put some materials together, but you don't have to go out and spend money on security awareness training. You can do it yourself if you don't have a budget. And I think that's very important. The defense in depth, as we said, and then preparedness. Preparedness is a big deal. I see someone in the chat said we actually have a documented incident response program standard. That's great. That's part of being prepared. I mean, you're ahead of the game with that, and that's exactly where you need to be on things like this.
Yeah, you could. And I'm glad to hear that too, because a lot of people don't have those plans in place, nor have they executed them. So they are ahead of the game there. Mike, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think you guys have really kind of polished it up. But the last thing that I would like to say is exactly what you guys have already said: education. And again, if you don't have this really big, vast network, I can tell you from experience, when I was an MSP admin, I sat down with the lady from HR. She always, had issues on a monthly basis. And guess what? She became so great at finding phishing emails. By the time I sat down for 15 or 20 minutes, the entire floor, and the entire floor of that building would always come to her and be like, hey, does this look like phishing? And again, just having that kind of light bulb moment, not to trust everything, kind of be a little bit suspicious. And of course, obviously you can't do that with everything, but just having that little bit of a stink eye towards every email might save you at the end of the day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good point. All right, Olivia, any other questions?
Looks like there's no more questions. I'll go ahead and start sharing my screen to go over the contact information.
Just some final comments for everybody. It doesn't have to stop here. Again, your security team or your incident response team is not a one-person deal. It should be a team of people. So please don't anybody out there think they need to take this on their shoulders. One, Otava can help at least facilitate a discussion. Contact one of these gentlemen you see on the screen here. We'd be happy to do it, be part of your team. Thank you for joining us today. And Olivia, final thoughts?
I just want to say thank you, and I'd like to thank our participants for joining, as well as Jason, Jeremy, and Michael for presenting and answering our questions today. We hope this webinar has been helpful for you and your organization. Thanks everyone for your time, and have a great day.